Love it or hate it, The Exorcist had a major impact on the way people understand spiritual matters. Paranormal horror was shining a light on things like demonic possession or evil entities giving people fantastic abilities like super strength. But why was there such a tipped balance toward paranormal horror instead of positive paranormal experiences? Where are the based on a true story accounts that don't end in a little girl shackled to the devil? What I found totally blew my mind because I'd never heard this anywhere else. Before Linda Blair was ever considered for the role of the possessed girl in The Exorcist, the producer reportedly asked another little girl to star in the role. And he wanted her because she had a long history of quietly exhibiting the most miraculous and amazing abilities imaginable. Mind reading, telepathic messages, dream premonitions, communication with the dead, self-healing, and an unusually high level of morality for such a young child were just the tip of the iceberg with this little girl. So what happened? Who is she? And why can we find almost no trace of Jenny's existence today? Why was her positive story buried in favor of a demonic one? I'm going to share what I found about her powers from the journalist who first broke the story in his book, plus what little else I could track down about the true story behind The Exorcist and the little girl who turned it down. Join me, Rob Counts, for a metaphysical show that's going to be out of this world. And a quick reminder to like and subscribe to the Metaphysical channel to make sure you don't miss out on any updates or content drops. All your support lets us keep making this content, so thanks a lot for watching. Let's start with proof of Jenny's abilities and some stories from her childhood. Then we'll see at the end how it all tied into The Exorcist. Now, sometime in the mid or late 1960s, Jenny's father had lost his pearl tie pin. Yeah, back then people still wore nice things like pearl tie pins. Jenny walked in as her parents were searching for it, and although she didn't know where it was, she grew serious and assured her father,
"Don't worry, Daddy. I'll find it."
Jenny frowned in concentration as her parents looked on amused, then told them to follow her. She led them out the front door and over to a pile of leaves. Jenny reached into the pile and pulled out a pearl precisely the size of the one on the tie pin. But there was no pin anymore. Clearly, the pearl had fallen off the pin and into the leaf pile while her father had gotten out of his car or something. This wasn't the first or last time Jenny had demonstrated fantastic psychic abilities. But because Jenny's father was a successful New York lawyer with a firm belief in provable reality, he refused to accept that his daughter was exceptional, until she did something so shocking that there was no more denying it. When she was around 7 years old, Jenny would repeatedly win at Scrabble against her mother Mira and her grandmother by 150 to 200 points. That's an enormous margin. She was angry that they were always letting her win, but they explained that, amazingly, they weren't. So how was she winning? Jenny would always draw the high-scoring letters or the exact ones she needed to make a 7-letter word or to get a triple word score. And get this, she wasn't a devious child using her superpowers to win. She genuinely didn't know other people couldn't do this too.
Why don't you draw the letters you want?
How can we?
I can do it.
Unfortunately, Jenny's parents ended up getting divorced. So during a visit to her father, Jenny was beating him at Scrabble when he got frustrated and demanded to know how she kept getting 7-letter words.
It's simple. You can too if you want to learn how to draw them.
What are you talking about? Listen, I have 4 letters in my hand now. If I drew the right 3, I would have a 7-letter word.
Which 3?
M, B, and E. Jenny later remembered,
I was so scared. If I could make him believe, I could make anybody believe. So I closed my eyes and I said a prayer and I put my hand in the bag and pulled out the letters M, B, and E. He kind of screamed and telephoned to my mother.
Okay, he told Mira, she's got ESP. That's a pretty amazing way to convince a skeptic that you have extrasensory powers. And the part that shocked me the most was that, again, Jenny wasn't using her abilities on purpose or for selfish reasons to win every game she played. She demonstrated it for her father in order to help him believe there was something more. That's pretty heavy stuff for a 7-year-old. And this was part of an extensive pattern of using her abilities to help other people. These next stories I'm about to get into are where we start piecing together a few more clues about who Jenny is, since the author of Psychic Children, Samuel H. Young, implied that he changed her name to protect her identity. You might be thinking, how do we know these stories about Jenny are true? Well, Samuel H. Young was a Harvard graduate who worked on public relations for the Pentagon. He wrote and edited for multiple publications and wrote a few books, so he wasn't some woo-woo quack or someone who was making it all up. He did extensive research into the experiences of people who had been psychic as children, consultations with leading parapsychologists, and meeting the children themselves. His interest as a journalist evolved into a full-time position at a research association involved in the study of psi. So this information on Jenny is about as accurately shared as we could hope for, and it seems to be true. When Jenny's parents divorced, her mother Mira took Jenny and her son to live with Mira's parents in Brooklyn. Mira got remarried to Harold Caston when Jenny was 8, and they all lived in Manhattan after that. Since Jenny was 14 when the book Psychic Children was published in 1977, we're looking at her growing up in New York City between 1963 and 1977. Sometime after the family moved to Manhattan, Jenny came home from school and called her grandmother because her mom, Mira, wasn't home when she should be. Grandma reassured her that her mother was probably just stuck in traffic. But while she had her on the phone, she asked Jenny to give her mother a message when she did see her. Quote, "Tell her I'm going out tomorrow night and I need those antique earrings she took to be repaired for me." Mira had apparently taken them to Janet Brown, which I looked up and found was a very, very upscale boutique carrying brands like Prada and Chanel.
Okay, now Chanel, you're in desperate need of Chanel.
In fact, the place was so upscale, in 1991, the New York Times reported that Janet Brown only bought items for 200 very special clients who would be called when something was right for them and think nothing of dropping $12,000 at a clip while their husband sat at a large granite dining table in the shop, sipping champagne or devouring a salad. Why do we care? We're starting to see the kind of wealth Jenny's family really had, which I'll get back to soon. Anyway, Grandma needed those antique earrings sooner if Mira could pick them up. Of course, Grandma didn't expect Jenny to give her the message right away since she wasn't home yet. Unbeknownst to them, Mira was heading home in a taxi right then. Suddenly, a strange shock passed through her body. Samuel Young wrote that Mira practically shouted for the cab driver to turn the taxi around and head back downtown to Janet Brown. Grandma hadn't given her any sense of urgency. She was already late getting home too. So what happened? As soon as her mother walked in the door of their apartment, so much later, Jenny called out,
"Did you get my message? About Janet Brown, Grandma's earrings."
But how she did it is the stunning part. She'd spoken the name of the store 3 times and apparently sent a telepathic message to her mother. Mira checked with Grandma what time she'd phoned Jenny, and the time was just moments before Mira had that sudden urge in the cab to turn back for the earrings. Jenny sent telepathic messages other times when there was an important reason. Once, a relative needed to go to the hospital and nobody could reach Jenny's grandma, who was the best person to take him. So Jenny went to her room, looked at her own image in the mirror, and concentrated on it until she was conscious of nothing else. In fact, her reflection even vanished. She sent the message,
"Grandma, call home,"
several times. Then there was a click somewhere inside her head, and she knew the message had been received. Indeed, at 7:25 at night, Grandma had felt a sudden urge that she had to call home, even though it could have made her late for the show she was out to see, and she found out about the relative. The time Jenny had sent her the mental message, 7:25. It's super interesting that Jenny didn't always know what she would do, but she knew it would work. Even here, she couldn't have known at such a young age that this kind of focusing on one thought until all other thoughts fade away is actually an old technique meditators have used throughout the centuries. But guys, think about it. That concentration technique takes a certain level of mastery. You try to just focus on your reflection or on one thought or on one word or a candle flame and see how long you can possibly do it. For other thoughts not to creep in at all, it usually takes years, and this kid was able to do it completely, at will. So aside from the anecdotal stories, this is the first info we have about Jenny mastering some kind of test, or certainly being above average, in a way we can measure and compare. Other meditators, like Pure Land Buddhists who practice focusing on Buddha Amitabha's name until all other thoughts disappear, takes years. Jenny did it the first time she tried. But how about other recognized tests, like the standard psychic tests we all hear about? What about professional institutes and doctors testing her? That's what I'm about to get into next. Jenny's abilities were kept mostly to their immediate family, but one day an accident changed their lives because it opened the door to more people knowing who could potentially help. When Jenny was 7, she asked her mother out of the blue one day from the backseat of the car,
Mommy, if a man in a big truck, a man who can't speak English, bangs into our car and doesn't hurt us but smashes the car, do we have to pay to get the car fixed?
It was a very strange question for a little kid, but Mira explained what insurance was and that they would pay. But Jenny seemed skeptical instead of reassured. A short while later, they were at a stoplight at a busy intersection when an enormous dump truck that was too high to see their car indeed shoved them in a slow, terrifying motion up onto the sidewalk, crumpling their car badly. Nobody was injured, luckily, but Jenny was crying so hysterically that lawyers started coming up to Mira with their cards, and policemen came to ask Mira a bunch of questions. The driver couldn't help because he didn't speak English, just like Jenny said. Since Jenny was still crying much later, Mira took her in a cab to the pediatrician who couldn't see anything wrong. He sent them to a neurologist to check for a possible head injury next, but that doctor couldn't find anything wrong either. The neurologist asked Jenny, "You don't even need an x-ray. Do you really think you were hurt?" Surprisingly, she answered,
No.
He asked why she was crying, and a huge weight seemed to lift off of her as she confessed,
Because it was my fault. I knew the accident was gonna happen, and I didn't tell Mommy.
Let me stop here and ask you a question. If you were the parent of a psychic child in 1970 who just told her very educated and professional neurologist that she not only predicted the future, but actually felt so guilty over not preventing the future scary event from happening that she was inconsolable, what would you do next? Mira downplayed what happened as the doctor pressed them more, saying it was just a little premonition. And the fates aligned. This doctor had actually studied ESP at Duke University. What are the chances? So he gave Jenny a test for clairvoyance using a special deck of cards called Zener cards. You've seen in Ghostbusters how they were testing if students could see a star, circle, wavy lines, or a cross on the back of a card. Well, that test is real. Jenny performed so well, even with her mother out of the room, that the doctor excitedly confirmed she had lots of ESP. The interesting thing here is that when I was researching telepathy and mind reading for my episodes on that and animal ESP, Duke University came up over and over. Duke was a leading pioneer in the field. If you remember from my episode, Dreams Are Real, another pioneer in ESP and dream studies was the Maimonides Hospital in Brooklyn, and Jenny was also sent there. Jenny and 3 adults who were said to have ESP were tested on remote viewing, which is when you perceive something remotely from a distance without your eyeballs actually seeing that thing. I mean, if you watch this show at all, you know that already. They were each asked to describe a number of art prints that had been sealed in 2 envelopes. Maimonides confirmed that Jenny got the highest score, describing 14 of 36 cards. Just think about that. About 39% of the time, this little girl could see with some extrasensory sight what was inside completely sealed envelopes and describe it without any training. Anything could have been in there. I think I'd score probably 0 out of 36 cards if I tried. I mean, how did she do it 14 times? Mira started testing Jenny at home with Zener cards too. And when Jenny learned that 5 out of 25 was average, she tried to score above it. She kept working until her accuracy was at 17, 18, or 19. I mean, to her, it was a fun game, right? She probably didn't understand she was being studied. When she started scoring well on precognition tests that had her guess future sequences of cards in an unshuffled deck, she surprisingly realized what she was doing at one point and just refused to continue.
It's impossible. It can't be done.
She was able to manipulate her own results, they quickly realized. When she wanted to score low or not get any of them right, she could make that happen. As she got older, the game wasn't as interesting anymore, of course, but at some point, her interest did return because she found what she called an ESP testing machine that she enjoyed. And she'd score as high as 23 out of 25 correct when chance was 6.5 out of 25. That's a 92% accuracy rate. By then, Jenny didn't like to talk much about her abilities or perform them. She just did it for fun. That was a good thing because teachers ridiculed her for interest in ESP or didn't understand. Her friends didn't understand either, but they thought it was interesting. In fact, Jenny had a reputation for being able to solve their problems, like she was somehow in tune with them. But within her immediate family, that's where they saw the weirdest stuff. In a dream, Jenny saw her great-grandmother, Nana, who had a pretty green and brown robe on her lap with white roses. It was all so real. Nana told her to give Mira a message. "Tell her Sugar Plum," she said. When she woke up, she told her mother Mira about the dream. Mira was shocked because Nana had made a robe before she died with that very pattern, and Sugar Plum had been Mira's nickname when she was a baby. Because the dream event scared Jenny, she prayed to Nana that it wouldn't happen again. But another time, she did pray to Nana when she was at the end of a math quiz and couldn't solve the extra credit question. The answer popped in her head. She said,
It was as if there was a dark screen inside my head and I could see the answer written in white lettering.
She shocked her teacher at getting it right without doing any calculations. More than once over the years, Jenny healed her own body of a high temperature when she found out it would keep her from doing some activities she needed to do, like go to school or normal activities at summer camp. She could make a high temperature go away within 15 minutes, for example. Those times, she said she prayed to Jesus because he was a healer, even though her family raised her Jewish. On the day of Jenny's bat mitzvah, which is a Jewish coming-of-age ceremony when you turn 13 years old, she moved the adults in the crowd so much by speaking of spiritual matters that some of them cried or said that Jenny had given them the most profound religious experience of their lives. She wasn't a saint, her mother said, but she always did little things for other people or used her ESP in difficult situations, often without seeming to use it on purpose. But I'm sure you're wondering about the Exorcist, right? Well, let me loop this back around. Samuel Young said that Jenny's stepfather was a financial analyst on Wall Street. By the time Jenny was 14, her mother, Mira, also personally knew the famous Israeli psychic Uri Geller, who's come up on this show plenty of times, and was famous for things like spoon bending. Their family could afford to shop at the best boutiques. Their apartment was in a prime location with a panoramic view of Central Park. I mean, if you've read the book Primates of Park Avenue by Wednesday Martin, you know this is the most expensive and sought-after real estate in all of Manhattan. All of this establishes the tier of society they were socializing with, and apparently, the producer of The Exorcist, who wrote the book the movie was based on, knew Mira personally and thought Jenny would be good for the part of the little girl who gets possessed by some evil force like the devil. Jenny guessed the man thought that if she was familiar with ESP, she wouldn't be upset by the idea of spirit possession. He thought wrong. Mira read the book and went right to the movie people to tell them off. At first, Jenny thought she was telling them off because they hadn't chosen her for the part after all. But then Mira explained she turned them down and read Jenny some of the less offensive passages in the book. And Jenny was furious too. She said,
Everywhere you turn, TV, movies, books, ESP is made so vulgar, as if it's something evil. I wish people would understand that it can be really beautiful and helpful. It's not the most important thing in the world to me, but as long as I have it, I use it. If I use it properly to help people and not for selfish reasons, it's really a joyful thing. And if I misuse it, it would easily disappear.
What did that mean? The slightest dishonesty could cost her her powers. One day, she picked up 2 brownies in the cafeteria that were stuck together, but the cashier only charged her for 1. Jenny decided not to say anything, but then she realized her ESP had disappeared. She tried everything, but they were gone. She was too embarrassed to go up to the cashier that day and confess, but by the next day, she was so miserable that she returned with the dime she owed. The cashier was so surprised at her honesty that she didn't want the money at first, but Jenny insisted. Jenny said she was sure that the woman thought she was crazy, but her ESP returned just like that. A dime seems like such a small thing, but Jenny said,
Well, right then, a dime seemed like everything.
Some of you may be asking, well, Rob, what do you think about all of this? Some of my theories are that Jenny was a yogi in another life, or a high-level being who incarnated as a human to help people, or just an exceptionally gifted and moral little girl who was put into people's lives to show them that there really is something more than what we can see and touch with our normal senses. From the little details about their lives and lifestyle, it's clear Jenny was born in a wealthy Jewish family in New York City, probably in 1963. Her mother drove a Mustang at one point, and her stepfather was supposedly Harold Caston. Young never named Jenny's father, her real father, first or last name, and didn't reveal Jenny's real name either. But it's not really important who she is. In fact, maybe it's better that nobody knows, because one thing is really clear. From how she lived her life up until this cutoff point of about 14 years old in 1977, Jenny always tried to be selfless, kind, honest, and to use her powers to help the people around her. That's some pretty high morality for just a little kid. I mean, I wasn't that cool when I was a little kid. Sometimes Jenny would see something accurately in a dream or a precognitive vision, as they call them, and become afraid or upset. But it turned out later that the way she interpreted the dream just wasn't accurate. You know, like one time, she dreamed when her father's family got off a plane, they would see soldiers and a wheelchair. Jenny thought it meant that her mother back home was seriously ill and got hysterical when the event really panned out. But her interpretation was a bit wrong. Her mother wasn't ill at all, and the wheelchair was for someone else entirely. The times when emotion got mixed in, or Jenny started to think too much instead of just observing, it would change the nature of what she knew. This sounds a lot like remote viewing. Did the author of The Exorcist make assumptions about ESP and paranormal events when he heard about Mira's amazing daughter? Is The Exorcist really only based on demonic possession of a boy in 1949? Is there another reason why they really changed the main character to a girl for the movie adaptation? In 2024, Jenny would be 61 years old. Does she still use her powers quietly for good? Where is she now? If you're watching, Jenny, I'd love to hear the rest of your story. As for everyone else, what do you guys think? Was The Exorcist partially based on a misrepresentation of ESP like Jenny's? Have you ever had an experience like hers? Comment below, because I love hearing your personal stories. If you like this episode and you want more, please consider supporting my work by pledging on our website, themetaphysical.tv. With your help, I can make more videos, more merch, which I designed myself, and also more exclusive episodes on topics like what is the observer effect, the hardest things to remote view, ancient sites that warn of cataclysms, and the Maya civilization came from Mars. You can also access full episodes of all of those with remote viewing data from my co-host John Vivanco at themetaphysical.tv. Unfortunately, by subscribing, I can't turn you into a remote viewer, but you can watch some pretty cool content. You can also get a bag of delicious Metaphysical coffee every month if you want your mornings to be interstellar. I know mine are. Remember to like and subscribe to help the channel grow as well. And if you want to hear longer conversational episodes right here on YouTube, our Metaphysical podcast has you covered with episodes on telepathy, animal ESP, and so much more. With that, I hope you thought this episode was out of this world.